Hello, world singers. My name is Tyler.
And my name is Brooke.
And this is
Cosmere Conversations.
Welcome back, all you lovely human beings. It is so wonderful to return once again to The Lost Metal. This is a sequel to our last episode when we were discussing metallurgy broadly, but really just kind of focusing on trillium and harmonium and the effects we saw throughout the final Era 2 book.
How they interact, all of the new things that we learned about them, got a little spicy. And this week, we are back to continue talking about metallurgy and the Lost Metal. This is going to be a little bit more focused on our three main metallic arts, hemalurgy, allomancy, and feruchemy.
Because one thing that is most important throughout Era 2 is the combination of magic systems and the way that powers interact that we're only kind of briefly exposed to from Era 1, Lord Ruler, and finding out about compounding. That's like the limit, really. And then Era 2 is all about pushing those connection, which I think is setting up, as we've discussed, Era 3, Era 4, and the broader Cosmere with Fabrials and kind of the Thydakar-esque mindset of we need to democratize this power so that no group can kind of become dominant and take over.
There's certainly a lot of advances and innovations that seem to be taking place on Scadrian. It's a little frustrating for me because a lot of it is taking place off page by the set. And so we kind of only briefly get introduced to all of these kind of bombshell discoveries that are happening, which I find frustrating because that means we don't get very much information about it. So it's kind of hard to say how this is going to progress going forward, what it's going to look like, what it means for the greater Cosmere. But we saw this magic system start to become even more integrated and connected to other magic systems in the Cosmere as well. And I feel like with this book and then with the secret projects coming out, we are really starting to get a more comprehensive picture of how investiture works Cosmere-wide.
So let's go through some of the big moments from The Lost Metal and kind of pull out the details of how metallurgy was used or manipulated and then, as always, connected to the broader Cosmere. I think for me, and what you mentioned, the set and their experiments has always been a driving interest and like a point of intrigue. But we had some of those like new characters introduced. For example, the mayor of Bilmy, Gave Entrone.
Yeah.
Who was funding / running and operating several of the different experiments and or torture chambers that they were working on.
Not great.
For hemalurgic advances.
Yeah, hemalurgy is really the biggest area where we get a lot of advancement in this book, and Entrone's scientists are able to sort of incrementally make a hemalurgic spike, and they do this by threading the spike through somebody, so not piercing them, not like jamming it straight in like you would with a nail and a hammer,
but instead
more like a sewing situation.
Yeah, what you would do if you were sewing up a wound, you would use a needle to, with some thread, obviously, to sew that skin together. My understanding is that is what they are doing. They are kind of weaving this piece of metal. It's described as very thin. I don't imagine it's as thin as an actual sewing needle.
Yeah.
We can probably guess it's going to be a little bit more painful than that. And the remnants, the holes, are probably going to be a little, icky. Exactly. But I think that concept of just kind of like dipping the metal in and out, and then in turn taking a little bit out of the spirit web from that individual.
Yeah, and then this is also sort of beneficial, I guess. It's hard to call anything in hemalurgy beneficial, but the benefit is that the investiture donor in this case is left alive. So it's not like the OG hemalurgy that we saw where the person donating the investiture is killed in the process. The person is still alive, and they also do not have to be a metal-born person. They don't have to be an allomancer or a feruchemist. They can just be an average run-of-the-mill Joe and still donate this investiture, because it's essentially taking the innate investiture that is in every human on Scadrial, very similar to taking
a breath.
Yes. Yeah, from a Nalthian. Every Nalthian is born with one breath. If you take that away, they're still alive. They're just a drab. And so these quote unquote investiture donors, not really donors, because
at this point, not a donor,
not consensual, but that person is alive simply without that bit of investiture. We don't see
a drab
really
effect?
What they are like after that.
My biggest question is, does this process, like on Nalthis, have a permanent impact that I think if a drab exists on Nalthis, they are more susceptible to disease and getting injured or like taking longer to recover. So it's like a general negative across all categories for a drab. And I'm wondering if it's a similar experience for these quote unquote investiture donors on Scadrial. But I think the answer right now is no. And that could be a little bit.
I think that there has to be.
I do think that there has to be something.
We just haven't seen it on the page.
Exactly. And that's kind of the problem, is like, this isn't a book about the experiments that the set is running, really. Right. It's about Wax and Wayne.
Maybe it would have been more interesting if it was.
Yeah. Or they were like two separate books, kind of, the Wax and Wayne adventure story and just the Cosmere stuff. Like,
or
I feel
even if you, instead of going sort of back and forth between Wax's perspective, Wayne's perspective, Marassi's perspective, if you had split it between Wax and Wayne and crew, and then like Telson's point of view.
That
would have been really interesting. And then you would have had sort of this dramatic tension.
A direct line into autonomy and the Cosmere stuff.
Right, exactly. You would get to see all of that firsthand, and then you would have sort of dramatic tension between knowing what Telson is doing and planning and like waiting for Wax to like figure it out. Yeah. That type of thing.
Giving the audience...
Could have been great.
Giving the audience a little bit more insight than Wax and Wayne have.
Right.
So that mystery element is kind of, being pushed forward. Like when you happen to see the murder on screen for a horror movie and you're just waiting for everyone else to figure it out.
Yeah, exactly. That could have been cool. We don't get that.
But what we do get is this concept of extracting investiture not only from Metalborn, which previously we hadn't understood, though I think we probably could have guessed by the nature of Scadrial and Ati and Laris's original creation. But this is from one of Entrone's scientists, and he having a conversation back and forth, and it goes like this, quote, "We believe that we've isolated the technique Edwarn was onto," she said. "Indeed, we've refined it. The process involves a very thin spike, my Lord Mayor, and oddly, the right mindset."
Mindset, he asked.
"You need to know what you're doing and why," the woman explained. "It helps to whisper a command as you work, though we find it isn't strictly necessary. Trauma on the part of the subject is helpful as well." End quote. Now, a couple of key things that we pull out from there. We already talked about the spike itself, but a command, that's a capital C command. And of course, with breaths and on Nalthis, commands are a key aspect of that magic system, but we've already seen it happen on Rashar with Navani's intent.
Well, I think those are two different things. So the right mindset, as she says, is the intent. To know what you're doing and why you're doing it.
Yeah, I was jumping and putting the two together. Right. So there's the mindset and then there's the command.
Right. So those are two different things. You have to have both, which on Nalthis we see as well. Vivenna learns that it is helpful if she can form a picture in her mind of what she wants the object to do. That's her intent, which, like you said, we also see with Novani. It's very clearly explained here in this quote. You need to know what you're doing and why you're doing it. And then the command is a separate thing. It's not totally clear how it's working in this instance.
Yeah.
But it's sort of the process, I think, of translating your sort of liminal idea into specific words would be the command.
I think that there is an aspect of, what are we doing? We are going into the spiritual realm via someone's spirit web. We're going into the spiritual realm. And what do we need to get there? A mindset, which would be from the cognitive realm, knowing and like giving you a guide through the cognitive realm. And then the command is a physical realm aspect because it's sound and it's like bringing that into the physical realm. Therefore, you have been a tiny little bondsmith. You've pierced the 3 realms and brought that idea into reality.
That's an interesting idea. I think this is also interesting where she says trauma is helpful. And I'm curious if that is because trauma sort of already creates that gap or like loosens the spirit web a bit in some way so that it's easier to chip off the piece that you are trying to get.
Yeah, it might be similar because we know that Elend was beaten, as were many children, I think a little bit before puberty. It's not even like a puberty onset thing. It's somewhere around 8 to like 10 years old. A lot of children on Scadria are beaten in order to try to manifest their allomantic abilities. And I'm wondering, like you said, something about loosening, or maybe, and this is a bit of a stretch, but maybe there is a kind of trauma activates the spirit web in a way that like highlights the magical bits that they are trying to take off. So it's a little bit like a homing beacon.
I think those are 2 different things. We know for sure that the metallurgic powers are activated by sort of a survival instinct, which makes sense, right? It's a power that can protect you, and so it's going to activate when you need it.
But it's triggered by a trauma or some type of like, you need to survive. And that's like in my...
But I think that this is the idea of trauma helping remove innate investiture from a non-powered person is a different thing. We see in other places in the Cosmere, right? Insane people are a little bit closer to the cognitive realm, maybe a little bit closer to the spiritual realm. It's much easier to access them as a god or a cognitive entity.
Yeah.
We see that trauma allows Spren to bond.
Of course.
And so we see that trauma sort of creates a gap or a hole already in the spirit web. So I think that is more what's going on in this instance, that it is sort of a separate thing from like an activation of power. It's more of a hole being bored in the spirit web in some way.
Yeah, I think that we are in complete agreement. The trauma in my mind is simply like calling to the fore, as if for a regular human, you and I, when we're in a stressful situation, we might have hormones, adrenaline, start all those triggers that happen for people on Scadrial and in the Cosmere at large. There's some part of like the spirit web that is recognizing they're like, oh, we need to perk up and pay attention here because we're in a dangerous situation.
Yeah.
Like life is on the line. So in that moment, what happens is different all across the Cosmere. But I do believe there's some type of signaling that the set may be trying to accomplish with the trauma to their victims, to these investiture
this
donors.
Is certainly a new trauma. But I think like if the person comes from a traumatic background, it is easier to get their investiture. That's what I'm saying.
I did not see that at all. I was saying they cause pain and trauma in order to perform this hemalurgic sewing, as we've been talking about.
It's kind of unclear what exactly they're talking about in that quote. And again, we don't get a whole lot of insight into it.
Yeah, we're trying to pull out a lot more than exists on the page. But to me, I'm seeing this as an example of how creepy and morally repugnant the set has become, is because they're having a scientific conversation of like, you need to have a mindset, you need to have a command, that means this, and then, oh, by the way, it also is helpful if we torture the person, if we cause them pain, that makes it better too.
Yeah.
And just lining all of those things up as if they are even, and skipping over any type of concept of like, oh, maybe we shouldn't be hurting people. Maybe that's a bad option.
I mean, that has always been the name of the game with hemalurgy, so unsurprising. We later get another interesting quote about this process. Quote, "The percentage you get depends on the person. We think it might have to do with how likely they were genetically to be metal-born, but they don't need that extra if the powers didn't manifest in them. It's vestigial. We simply slice it off and use it in a spike. Fully investing one takes between 20 and 30 people." End quote.
So when we see those twins of Wax and Wayne in the Lost Metal, it is our assumption that they have at minimum one, but probably multiple of these newly invested spikes, taking between 20 and 30 people to, craft that spike that can then be implanted in them as a true hemalurgic spike.
Probably. Yeah. I think there's a lot of interesting things in that quote. For example, the idea that because a person wasn't born metal-born, that this piece of investiture is just vestigial and is like not an important part of your soul. It's fine. Which obviously we see otherwise on Nalthis if we're comparing these two types of investiture and systems of investiture. Like, it's not vestigial. It is important. And this is something that happens in like science and in medicine all the time, where we're like, that can't be important. I don't know what it does. And then later on, we're like, oh no, that's very important. Like, just because you don't know what it is doesn't mean it's not important. That just means you're dumb.
Yeah, you just lack the information that would tell you what that is most suited for. I also find it very interesting and wonder how comparable it is across other Cosmere planets, but this genetic necessity and requirement to metallurgic powers is exactly the thing that Thydakar is trying to work around.
Yeah.
And criticizes, Zazed as holder of the powers, but really he's like criticizing Ati and Laris for the creation of this genetic power in the first place. This is maybe on the scale of Cosmere planets. I'd like to place Rashar at the tippy top of the list for spirit web openings and an investiture entity, in that case, a spren, filling those openings. And then it just kind of like goes down the list.
What's the list? Like, what does the top mean? It's the easiest? It's the best?
It's the most clear example of what happens when a spirit web is open and an invested entity can get in there, or just investiture plainly. But the other planets don't represent, like, they don't have that big or easy access, which is why I think Radiants are so powerful.
Well, yeah, I mean, you could like flip that either way and say that Rashar is actually on the bottom because their people are not automatically born with investiture. They essentially all have to sort of hemalurgically add investiture to their spirit web. They have to be traumatized, and then they have to, insert a spren into that gap in their spirit web in order to become invested. Where you could say Nalthis and Scadrial are better because, well, Nalthis would be the best because everyone is born with at least one unit of investiture. Scadrial, everyone genetically has a chance to be born with at least one unit of investiture. Rashar, no one is automatically born with investiture.
Yeah, I'm going to leave out the best, worst aspect and just categorizing these different magic systems and the way that they work within the spirit web, you have Scadrial seemingly more on a comparable level to Nalthus with this information.
Yeah.
This concept that like you have a baseline Scadrian who we can still take magic out. Like they still have investiture that can be drawn out. Then you have a Scadrian who has extra investiture, but not enough to become Metalborn. So they just have, baseline plus 5.
Well,
and you can take the 5 and whatever was part of the baseline.
Yeah, I think you have to be careful about saying like extra, because again, then you get into like, it's vestigial. You're like, well, it's not really extra. Like, it is essential to you.
And then you have people who have so much investiture on Scadrial that they become Metalborn, and you can remove a larger percentage of that power to create a hemalurgic spike, or you could create a true hemalurgic spike by killing them. And so this dividing between the population is setting up exactly what Zayz is fearful of, and what he presented as the big problem to Thydakar in regards to the set's activities of just like, once you go down that road, it always leads to darkness. And it always leads to what I think is going to happen in Era 3, a weird segmentation of the society, and then a group of people working against that type of segmentation.
You think it's going to go back to like Era 1 where Metalborn people have more power than non-Metalborn people?
If we believe what the set has to say here, that there is a genetic component to invested people on Scadrial, and that continues into the future, they're going to attack that genetic difference, and they're going to look for ways to manipulate those genetic differences. And I feel because it's tied into the magic system of the planet, and this imbalance seems to exist, that it's more difficult than other planets to imagine this like going well for them. It seems like they have to go down the dark path because of the imbalance in their magic system.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the question is, do you go down the genetic path like Kelsier is asking Harmony, like, give us Mistborn, let Mistborn be born again? Or do you go down the technology path and develop technology so that it equalizes the playing field and genetics matter less? Obviously, they should go down the technology path.
Which is what I think Thydakar is trying to do. I don't think he wants the genetic dominance. He says very clearly, I want to democratize this. So what he wants is Lerasium, and then to be able to dish out that Lerasium.
But right. The Lerasium is manipulating the gene pool. It's not creating a device that anyone has access to. Like, those are two different things. And I think the Lerasium route, the genetic route, is not the way to go. That is the way of discord and strife. To promote drastic innovation of technology using metallurgic powers is the thing that is going to more truly democratize the power and make it available to everyone, also making it more reliable without needing to do freaking weird genetic things of like who's marrying who. Now you have, baby selection. If you're only, choosing metal-born children, like you just go down a really weird route. Just go the technology route, people. Just create a Scadrial iPhone situation that changes the face of your planet.
Yeah, and then is it Ghostbloods are the owners of... They are the Apple in that situation?
Obviously, there are, like, foreseeable issues with that, but it is vastly preferable to anything else.
What we also see in the creation of these hemalurgic spikes is that there is some type of liquid solution as well as a device that they use to determine how much of the spike is invested.
Yeah, it's something that is able to measure investiture, a combination of a solution and some kind of tech device. I'm so curious what they are using here. We saw white sand be used on Rashar for investiture measurement.
But in a much more primitive way.
Yes, this seems to be a completely different thing, and I am very curious what's going on here.
What I would love for it to be, though, and I don't think the timeline matches up with this perfectly, but I would love for it to be a white sand device developed on Taldane that is like the advanced version of what we see on Rashar, because the thing that got to Rashar was just the sand itself, not how the people of that world would use the sand in their own way, or how they have been using it for a really long time. And I just have this concept of like, you should be able to use the exact same principles that we saw on Rashar with white sand, but get a digital readout of that information. Like
this would have to be even more refined, though, because the constriction of the white sand, if I'm remembering correctly, is just like black or white.
Yes.
And invested, not invested. It wouldn't give you this fine gradation of knowing that the spike is precisely 5% invested.
Unless you had developed some type of hyperpotent solution that was supremely reactive to the white sand. So what I'm imagining, and this might not be what is actually happening. Again, we don't get a bunch of this.
I think it might be completely different.
Yeah, it could be entirely new. But what I'm imagining is that the solution has the spike dipped into it, and then the device has white sand inside of it. And then like a COVID test, you take your solution, you drippy drop it onto your device, and what's happening there is a reaction between the white sand and the solution, and that's giving you the hyper accurate reading of investiture.
I'm curious if it's like using Trellium, which is repelled by investiture, and then depending on how far away, like how much the Trellium moves away from the investiture, that tells you, what percent it is or something like that.
Yeah, that's not a bad guess too. If you have any guesses, feel free to reach out, or you can always get us directly on patreon.com by becoming a patron. We have a lot of fun stuff going on over there and always respond to the patrons first. So join us over there. Do you want to hit me with this last quote from this section?
Yeah, this was really interesting. Quote, "We think we need to code this in some way to give a specific metallic art blessing. We're working on that. We've had some few gain a power for a short time using one of these spikes, but it gives out soon after." End quote.
Okay, so all of this work that we're talking about.
Fascinated by how they would code for a specific metallic art.
Piece of cake. I already know the answer.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, it's Elantris. Duh. No,
I was
excuse
thinking
me.
Forgery.
It is the door. Duh. Forgery would work as well, because I think that, of course, both of those coming from Cell are connected, even if they're not the same type of magic system. But I believe that with the Aeon door, we have an example of coding the magic system to do something specific, and it's at your will. You can make the magic system do different things based on your coding input, in this case, like waving your finger around and drawing the door. But it could be done in a similar way. I think Forgery acts on similar principles and therefore could also be a way in. But to me, it is important that the acknowledgement has to happen of this is not successful for them. This is not resulting in the ideal version of what they want, which is like a creation of a new Mistborn and a fully spiked individual a la Marsh.
They're still at the early stages of their experiments. And I think this actually points to, as we were talking about before, the evil twins of Wax and Wayne. They are probably actually not the product of these types of spikes. They probably have regular hemalurgic spikes from, single individuals granting the powers.
Yeah, they were the primary use case, and so got the real thing. Whereas this secondary method of like mining a little bit of spirit web or investiture out of people has only given individuals power for a couple of hours. So it would almost be like a palm situation where you got to keep like swapping in new spikes.
Yeah, I don't know. It's pretty gruesome.
Hemalurgy has always been one of the more gruesome aspects of the Cosmere, but I do love that this balance exists between the three, and the way that the in positive, neutral, and in negative has always functioned on Scadrial and throughout the Cosmere, I think is important. Like, we got to keep those ideas in mind. It just becomes, I think, more complicated the more variables we enter into the situation. For example, on Rashar, there are 2 original shards who have a lot of influence on that planet, but there are native species on that planet that have also found ways to interact with investiture. And then there is a new shard, now new, thousands of years old, but Odium all wrapping it up and influencing. And it's, we get to see different scales, stories and powers on different scales across the Cosmere.
Let's continue down this train of thought, sort of connecting this to the door, because we hear this quote between Moonlight and Marasi, quote, "If they're even close to forging Metalborn out of the raw power of souls, if they've had tests that resulted in an Allomancer, no matter how fleeting, Marasi, that path could lead to creating spikes using pure investiture instead of souls." She tapped her rucksack, indicating the glowing jars inside.
Ruin, the ability to create spikes in a mechanical way. Even the process of making medallions among the Malwish required Metalborn. If what Moonlight implied was right, then it would change everything, end quote. To me, this is what the Lost Metal is about. Well, I mean, the Lost Metal is about Wax and Wayne, duh. But the introduction of this single line, the ability to create spikes in a mechanical way, pushes past even what the medallions can be done.
Which really would only be possible with some type of pure investiture like the door, or maybe this is why Thydakar is trying to export Stormlight. Yeah, as a really easily accessible source of pure investiture. You can then dip the spikes in that. If you learn how to code them specifically, then you can spike everyone on Scadrial and give everyone a metallurgic power.
Do you think there's actually a top end of power, or could you literally take the entire planet, let's make up a number of their population, just say like there's 100 million humans on Scadrial. Could you spike all of them and have them all be metal-born?
Yeah, why not?
I don't know. I'm just wondering about like a balance, maybe, some type of like anti-force that where on Rashar, we have light, anti-light, we have a balance that is thrown off by the death of honor. It, to me, just like, I don't think everyone on Rashar could be a radiant.
I think they could. I think the problem is when you start exporting, because as it stands, Rashar is a self-contained ecosystem where the investiture is coming in the storms, and then it goes back to the storms sort of as it is used or expended in some way. And so it's renewing itself. When you start to take the investiture out of the world, off planet, then you're going to be imbalanced. This is where we get to like a resource extraction problem, where if a bunch of other planets are coming in and like quote unquote mining the investiture out of Rashar, you're going to have problems.
That's a great way to look at it, is like if you stay within the ecosystem, there may be eventual balance, but exporting that can generate a whole bunch of new issues. Let's talk in a little bit more detail about Thydakar and Hemalurgy, because he tried it on himself.
Yeah, he's done something kind of crazy, tacking his soul onto a human body. And he now is sort of metallurgic power inert. Like, he does not have his allomantic powers from before, and we hear that, quote, "Hemalurgy had proven ineffective on what he'd become. It held his soul and body together, but no more," end quote. So he cannot spike himself and gain powers either.
And Harmony also says that a bead of Lerasium would not work on Kelsier.
I have questions
Could that be Harmony
about
lying?
that, if Harmony is lying about that to protect the world.
It is a really interesting question, though, because previously we had these Type 2 invested entities that we have discussed in a great amount of detail that include the Returned, and we also think include the Heralds.
Yeah.
But it would probably include Zeth as well.
Yeah.
To me, the difference between some of those categories is that why is Thydakar unable to use his magic system where a Returned can control breath, Vasher, obviously. A person like Zeth, whatever did happen to him, is able to use Stormlight and Honor Blades. Like, there's no restrictions on anybody else. So what is going on specifically with Thydakar?
I think Zeth is the closest comparison to Thydakar. They both died and then had their spirit web / soul reattached to a body. Maybe Seth is in a better circumstance because, one, it was done basically immediately after he died. Two, it is his original body.
Yes. I think that is actually the most important thing. And if I was going to guess why it doesn't work on Thydakar, but it does seem to work with other Type 2 invested returned entities, is because Kelsier doesn't have his body. And
because you're bridging all three realms, right? And in this case, his soul is like an organ that is being rejected by the body in a way. And
certainly in a way, they're fighting.
You're trying to get the power from the spiritual realm into the physical realm, but there's some kind of block in the passageway that will not allow the power to manifest physically.
Yeah, and actually, if we think about it like an Elantrian who has to orient themselves in physical space, Kelsier's actual cognitive shadow is saying, "Hi, I'm Kelsier, and I'm a Mistborn, and that power goes to this location in the physical world," but it's trying to direct, it's coded to direct to his body. And so then when he's stapled onto a different body, it goes, "Hi, I'm Kelsier, give me the power," and it comes back as like impossible to find.
Yeah, like his spirit web is addressed as in the beyond.
Exactly.
And so the power is just like looping back to the beyond, basically.
It's like Kelsier needs power, and then it gets right back into the beyond.
Yeah, exactly. And Kelsier is like, "No, I moved. I have a new address."
Always make sure to update your address with the DMV on your local Cosmere planet. If we were going to speculate on, Thydakar specifically, do you think they eventually get full Mistborn powers again?
Kelsier specifically, or just the planet?
No. Does Kelsier Thydakar become a Mistborn again?
I think no.
Okay. I also think no. But, anything could happen. Don't really know Brandon's long-term plan for Kelsier Thydakar.
Yeah.
He could become the main person and the main character that we follow through a lot of the rest of Mistborn. Like, starts with Kelsier, ends with Thydakar Kelsier. I can absolutely imagine that situation. I know you're grumbling over there.
I would not like that. I'm fine with him being sort of a background player, and for him being a window into these kind of weird cosmological questions. I wouldn't want him to be at the center of the story again.
I simply want Mistborn Secret Histories to be all Kelsier, maybe / Ghostblood stuff now, and for, like you said, that to only exist in the background of the main books. I kind of want it to be like a Darth Vader situation from the original trilogies. I know there's a whole bunch of new stuff with Darth Vader as like the main character. But in the first movie, Darth Vader's on screen for like 9 minutes, 10 minutes.
Not very much.
He's not on the screen. He's not a main character, but it's just so imposing, and the character is so like iconic that it sticks in everyone's brain. That's what I want Kelsier to be like, to have just like huge moments, important and significant moments, and existing in the background as kind of this strange, powerful entity character that is not quite able to compete with the shards, but is arrogant enough to do it and like to try to do that. So I see that role, but I could also literally see him becoming the main character again of Era 3 and Era 4, and it just like follows him on what he's doing.
He's kind of just the poor man's Hoyd.
Yeah, that is a similarity that I believe might be revisited.
Like, has survived for longer than they should have, are trying to gain power, but Hoyd's doing a way better job.
So just give me the adventures of Hoyd?
Yeah, basically.
Let's go to some miscellaneous stuff.
Yeah, in talking about hemalurgy, there are also new hemalurgic creations. We previously saw some weird hemalurgic creations in, I think it's Shadows of Self, right? Where Wax is in the caverns and he gets chased by these creepy human animal gross things.
Yeah, they're like hybrids. I got kind of a werewolf vibe, so like a hyena human combo type of thing.
Yeah, something like that. And then in this book, we heard about a new creation, and apparently these are being called chimera, hemalurgic chimera.
And created with a trellium spike.
Yes, they have 2 spikes rather than 1, and apparently these creations used to be called metal mutants. So there are plenty of interesting possibilities for gross hemalurgic creations.
Certainly not looking forward to gross hemalurgic creations, but when we are discussing this genetic component and this world that is advancing incredibly quickly, that also feels threatened from multiple sources, the Malwish and the people of the Southern, but also now autonomy's shown up, and how is that dealt with by society? I could see just a lot of people saying, similar to Thydakar's philosophy of just, we're in danger. We need everything. We need to do anything possible. So like, a hemalurgic creation of like a hound Koloss combo thing. I could see a whole bunch of just like wild creations, horrific creations.
Yeah, I think this is kind of their version of Lifeless Army type thing.
Exactly. Yeah, they have this power to generate a thing, a being, I suppose, that basically no one else would know how to deal with or be able to deal with.
Yeah, that also gives you like expendable troops if you needed them.
Dark. Very dark. Not looking forward to that world.
Yeah.
Let's discuss Allomancy and Feruchemy in the Lost Metal and kind of how those react. I think that hemalurgy is obviously the star of the show and way more interesting, but there is similarly interesting information that we get about both Allomancy and Feruchemy as well.
There's a couple of interesting nuggets in there. We hear from Wayne an interesting perspective on his powers. Quote, "People didn't often refer to speed bubbles and slowness bubbles as pushing and pulling, like they talked about steel pushes and iron pulls. But it was the same, what Wayne did. It was pushing on reality itself, distorting it, shoving it inward, warping it." End quote. Fascinating perspective.
Clearly, we have discussed a lot about the pushing and pulling nature of the metallic arts, and the descriptions, of course, in the Ars Arcanum follow that pattern as well. It makes perfect sense, but it was one of those things easy to overlook because it feels so different. The manipulation of time, Marasi, and Wayne's power, but keeping those abilities in your mind as pushing on the very reality or the fabric of reality, or pulling on the very fabric of reality, to me is setting up something. I don't know if that's future space travel.
Yeah.
And we've talked about trying to counteract the effects of relative time, or if there is some other. But once you say that Wayne is pushing on the fabric of reality, I'm like, well,
yeah,
that could lead to some things.
That's a whole can of worms that hopefully we'll get into at some point.
So, and Wayne's description of shoving it inward, so he is pushing on reality. Marasi then would be pulling on reality.
Yeah.
And opening it up, or like taking reality and forcing it outward.
Yeah. Extending it in some way.
Yes. And I am incredibly curious because there's an element of speed that comes into this as well. There's the steel runners, Feruchmus, who can store their speed. And I, question if someone was going very, very fast because of steel running, they would experience some time dilation, some similarity to what Wayne or Marasi can do. Where is the difference? What is the difference? Is it just like an amount? If you were going fast enough, do you become Wayne? Or is what Wayne is trying to describe here, he's fundamentally different than just moving really, really fast. Like he is
I wonder
creating
if there's
something else.
Yeah, I wonder if there's a difference of like Wayne is manipulating the environment around himself and a steel runner is like manipulating themselves inside the environment or something. But this is where we get way out of my depths in terms of science things, and I just go magic and throw my hands up.
Well, I think it's far closer to magic than it is a strict science based or like an aspect of the physical world. But I think that distinction is important. Is like Wayne is not simply moving very, very quickly and therefore experiencing time different from everyone else.
Right.
He is opening up or adjusting the fabric of reality. And that probably has bigger connotations down the road.
Yeah. If you're a science type and you're listening to this, send us some messages about time and reality and science words, and that'll be cool.
There certainly has been a lot of discussion. Want to give a shout out to a user named Curtis Franks over on YouTube. If you did not know, all of these episodes are available on YouTube and you can listen there. But there's been a bunch of interesting conversations happening over there. A little bit more science just because this one user has a background in physics and in science teaching. So really cool. Jump on the YouTube comments if you would like. Now, part of the plot twist of the Lost Metal and a little bit what we discussed in our last episode was that Wax and Wayne become Mistborn because of the Lerasium created in the initial explosion. Wax by exposure and then Wayne by gift of harmony towards the end of the book. What I didn't quite understand, I wanted to know if you had any insight, was did Wayne require an additional power in order to accomplish his bomb diffusing feat?
Yes.
It wasn't just Duralumin, which boosts his own power.
Well, yeah, I think it was Duralumin.
Okay, that's all he needed.
Yeah.
Okay. I was curious if there was some unique cocktail of multiple powers that he was drawing from. But if he just needed the boost to his own abilities, that makes sense.
And then Wayne also uses steel pushes to push the barrels out of his speed bubble.
Okay, so he's got a couple of things going on. Wax has the Duralumin spike that he implanted and is also a Mistborn. I bet on the reread, there are going to be several moments throughout the book where something happens here or there. A line is said that points to the Mistborn nature of Wax.
Yeah, there definitely is. I am attempting to get through my reread right now, which is not easy, unfortunately. But there's a line pretty early on. It's basically right after the explosion happens. He and Steris go back home and they're looking through newspapers for clues. And Wax has a moment of noticing that he feels kind of funny. Like his eyesight is a little bit weird and like his hearing is a little bit weird, and he chalks it up to being tired, basically. But I'm pretty sure that is a clue that some of his new powers are like attempting to be manifest, and he doesn't quite know how to process that new stimuli.
In the epilogue, we have a conversation between Waxteris and Marsh about how he can walk around seemingly without attracting any attention.
And he says that it's just emotional allomancy. That's how he does it. And then we get this quote.
Quote, "From there, Death withdrew. Wax didn't buy his explanation of using emotional allomancy to remain hidden. There was something more here." End quote.
Don't know what it is, but that's fascinating.
It would be interesting to know what the more is there.
There seems to be a lot more to Marsh. Like, there's weird stuff happening with Marsh that I feel like we haven't really gotten any adequate explanations about or potential reasonings for.
And when it comes to Scadrial, at least for me, we have to constantly be imagining, is this a natural byproduct of the environment, or is this manipulation by Harmony/Discord?
Yeah, sure.
Clearly, Marsh has a lot of things going on that would simply allow him to be a very powerful entity on his own.
Yeah.
But there can also be just direct involvement from Harmony's side when it comes to Marsh that we're unaware of. The line about something more going on than just emotional allomancy, to me, is curious because, what else would Marsh need?
Well, he was originally a copper misting, correct?
Yes.
Which is a shielding bubble.
Mm-hmm.
My guess is that perhaps similar to Wayne, who recently has had both the fortune and the time to practice more with his metal than anyone before. Over the centuries, Marsh has had the opportunity and unlimited access to metal, where he's been able to practice with copper clouds so much that he sort of found different and new and more refined uses for them. And that's what he is doing in this circumstance.
I really like that call, is he has basically savanted himself, and maybe savanted himself in multiple metals. We don't see that on screen in the same way, but I do like that concept of the copper cloud normally blocking investiture or the signals of burning metals. Now Marsh is using to block himself from reality, from other people's spirit webs. Like kind of, previously if there was like a beacon that went out whenever someone burned metal, and that's what the copper cloud was blocking.
It could be more of like a life sense dampening, maybe, in the way that a person on Nalthis can diminish their investiture to become less detectable to other people's innate ability to sense the people around them. It may be something like that.
Yeah, a loophole is definitely possible with
shielding his essential alive humanness.
And while we talk about Marsh and allomancy hand in hand, I think that Telson actually introduces a little bit of the Furukami angle on this as well. Could you read this quote from Telson for us?
Quote, "Actually," she said, "it won't hurt. Did you know that a Furukamist can store their pain in a metal mind?" End quote.
So to me, I have a question of is there some combination element going on here? Maybe Marsh is manipulating more things than even we are aware of.
Yeah, very weird. I looked at the chart of all the things all the different metals do. There is not one that specifically says stores pain. So I just don't really know what she's talking about, how she's doing this.
Well, there is a pain reel on Rashar. We definitely saw that. And I'm surprised. I thought that there would be one that said explicitly, stores pain. But no. Okay, then to me, maybe this is something about storing identity or storing connection in some way that we don't completely understand. Whereas for Marsh, if he could store his identity and connection to other people, then like you said, it's like Nalthinian turning themselves down and bringing him off the grid or off radar, so to speak.
I think that's a good call for Marsh. My thought for Telsin was more in the vein of like pewter, maybe. When an Allomancer uses pewter, they sort of become a little bit more durable. So is she sort of doing that? And like, I don't know. If anybody listening has some better thoughts about what Telsin is doing here, I would be interested to hear.
I wonder if she is kind of speaking metaphorically or speaking literally.
She's very literally speaking, because this is a moment when Wayne is like, I'm going to torture you, basically.
And she's like,
it's fine. It won't matter to me at all. I will just be bored.
If I had infinite amount of resources in this fictional universe, I would go over to Richard, deeply study the pain reel, and there might be a hint in the metal or the construction of that would tell me what Telsin is doing and how she is resisting this pain of her physical body.
Great point.
Okay, time to wrap it up. That's a lot on metal. Is there anything else that you want to add, either about Waxer Wayne or metallurgy in general?
No, I think we've done a pretty good job on going through all of the metallic arts. We will be back with some more Lost Metal topics in the coming weeks. And of course, our Secret Project #1 book club is starting on Patreon. Very excited for that. Once again, those episodes will be up on the main feed once everyone has access to those books.
If you are only interested in getting a digital copy, either in text or audiobook format, those are available to the general public for Secret Project #1. And you can expect each quarter for the same process to be followed, where it's released to the backers, and then about 15 days later, it is available digitally to everyone. And so you can read Secret Project #1 right now if you would like. You just have to purchase it via digital download. Thank you so much for listening in. We really appreciate all of the commentary and feedback. Let us know your thoughts on the Cosmere and everything going on in the Lost Metal. Brooke, can you take us away?
Until next time, life before death,
strength before weakness,
journey before destination.